I stood at attention in the hushed solemnity of the Pentagon auditorium. The weight of the metal resting against my chest should have felt heavy, but compared to the years I carried on my back, it was featherlight. Cameras flashed, the echo of applause rolled like distant thunder, and yet my thoughts were fixed far away, in a place no one else could see. I knew that in a banquet hall hundreds of miles from here, my father was watching the same broadcast. The man who once looked me in the eye and told me I was worthless now had no choice but to witness this moment. That thought did not bring me joy. It brought me silence, the kind that comes when a long battle is finally over. For a second, I let myself breathe. The air smelled faintly of polished brass and starched uniforms. My hands, steady as stone, did not tremble. My eyes did not search the crowd for familiar faces. I had long since stopped expecting to find them. Instead, I lifted my chin toward the flag that hung above the stage, its colors bright under the lights. That flag was my anchor, my family, my witness. The roar of the room faded into a hum. Inside me, another voice rose, quiet but sharp. The man who once called me a disgrace is now forced to see me honored by a nation I bled for. Before I take you further into this story, into the battles fought not only on foreign soil, but inside my own home, I want to pause. If you believe in stories of courage and resilience, if you believe in the strength it takes for a woman to rise from rejection to redemption, I ask you to like this video and subscribe to this channel. This is where we keep alive the voices of veterans who endured, who carried scars both visible and unseen, and who chose to define their worth against all odds. Now let me take you back, long before the cameras and the medals, before the uniform that fit me like a second skin. Back to the days when I was just a girl from a steel town in Indiana. My father worked with his hands until they cracked. My mother stayed in the kitchen with her quiet sighs. My brother was the shining sun, the promise of the family. And me, I was the shadow at the edge of the photograph, the one whose victories were dismissed as hobbies, whose dreams were folded away like old laundry. I learned early that love in that house was conditional, and my worth was negotiable. It was in those shadows that the fire first sparked. Every slight, every dismissal, every word that told me I was less than planted seeds I carried with me. Seeds of defiance, seeds of strength. They grew in silence, hidden, until the day I walked into a military recruiter's office and signed a contract that would change the course of my life. I did not know then that the Army would give me more than a career. It would give me a family. It would give me a reason to keep fighting when the ghosts of home still tried to pull me under. And so, as I stood beneath the bright lights of the Pentagon, metal glinting against my uniform, I was not thinking of revenge. I was thinking of survival, of resilience, of the long road that had brought me here, and of the truth that no one, not even the man who called me worthless, could ever erase again. The first lessons I learned about value did not come from textbooks or classrooms. They came from the silence at my family's dinner table, from the way my father's eyes lit up when my brother spoke, and from the way those same eyes clouded over when I dared to open my mouth. I grew up in a small town in Indiana where the steel mills lined the river like giants asleep, their smokestacks reaching into the gray sky. My father worked there, his body shaped by years of heat and iron, his hands cracked and hardened by endless shifts. He carried that weight home with him, and it seemed to fill every corner of our modest house. My mother was quieter, her life measured in laundry cycles and grocery lists, her voice rarely rising above a sigh. And then there was my brother, Daniel, the golden son. He was taller than me even as children, broad-shouldered and confident, with a smile that could charm an entire room. To my father, Daniel was the proof that the Vaughn family name still meant something in a town that was fading. I was not proof of anything. I was background noise. Have you ever felt like the wallpaper in your own home, visible but never truly seen? That was my childhood. When Daniel won his first track meet at 12, my father spent an entire Saturday building a shelf in the living room to display his ribbon. When I brought home an A in science, my paper disappeared into the kitchen drawer under stacks of unpaid bills. My victories, small and hard won, were treated like hobbies, distractions, things that would never last. It did not matter how hard I tried. At 15, I found myself standing at the edge of a swimming pool with a medal in my hand. It was the first time I had beaten every other girl in the 500-meter freestyle, the first time I had felt water carry me faster than fear. My lungs had burned, my muscles had screamed, but I touched that wall first. For a brief, dazzling moment, I believed maybe this time would be different. Maybe my father would look at me and see more than a shadow. I carried that medal home like treasure, the ribbon tangled around my fingers, my heart racing with anticipation. I taped the small newspaper clipping to the refrigerator door so no one could miss it. I left the medal in a box on my dresser, shining like a promise. The next morning, the clipping was gone. In its place was a note scrawled in my mother's hurried handwriting. Daniel's practice at 4. Do not be late. My heart sank, but worse was yet to come. A week later, I found the medal missing. I tore apart my room, panic rising in my throat until I heard the sound of my father's boots in the garage. I found him there, wiping grease from his hands, the smell of gasoline thick in the air. I asked him if he had seen it. He did not even glance up from the engine of Daniel's battered truck. Sold it, he said casually, as if it were a piece of junk lying around. The money went to fix the transmission. That truck will get your brother to college. The medal would have just gathered dust. I can still feel the weight of those words pressing against my chest. In that moment, something in me cracked. It was not just the loss of a medal. It was the realization that in this house my worth was negotiable, expendable, disposable. I wonder, as you listen, if you have ever had something precious dismissed as worthless by someone you longed to please. How did it feel? Did it leave you breathless, as if all the air had been stolen from your lungs? That day, I walked back to my room and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the empty shelf. My hands shook, but my face did not show tears. I had learned early that crying only fed my father's disdain. I sat still, swallowing the ache, and whispered to myself a vow I did not fully understand at the time. One day I would leave. One day I would build a life no one could take apart piece by piece. But leaving was still years away, and in the meantime I had to survive. I turned inward, toward books and maps, tracing my finger along rivers and mountain ranges I had never seen. I dreamed of places where no one knew my name, places where I could start over. Every red dot I placed on that old map was a seed of hope, a quiet rebellion. My brother had trophies. I had escape routes. And yet, even in those years, there was a small flicker of belief inside me that maybe, just maybe, if I worked hard enough, if I became extraordinary enough, my father might finally look at me and say he was proud. That longing is a stubborn flame. It can burn you alive if you let it. Can you relate to that hunger for approval, the kind that keeps you awake at night? If you can, drop a comment. I know I am not the only one who has carried that silent weight. Part of me wishes I could say I stopped caring, that I turned my back on their indifference right then. But the truth is I carried that need with me for years, into places far from Indiana, and it would take war itself to finally burn it out of me. The summer I turned 16, Indiana was hot enough to bake the earth into clay. The air shimmered above the blacktop roads, cicadas screamed from the trees, and every day felt endless. I spent most afternoons at the community pool, chasing silence beneath the water's surface. Down there the world was muted, my thoughts carried only by the rhythm of my own breath. I loved the way each lap erased the noise of my house, the sting of my father's dismissals, the hollow quiet of my mother's avoidance. Swimming was the one place I felt both invisible and free. The water did not care if I was Daniel's sister or Robert Carter's daughter. It measured only endurance, only grit. For a girl desperate to prove herself, it was salvation. I can still see the day I won the state meet. The stands were filled with cheering parents, flags waving, whistles shrieking. My name flashed on the scoreboard, first place in bold. The metal ribbon was damp against my neck, and for once the noise around me felt like it belonged to me. That evening I rushed home with the newspaper, my picture grainy but clear, and I taped it to the refrigerator door with trembling hands. The next morning it was gone. In its place, a blank notepad for grocery lists. That scrap of newsprint, the evidence of my triumph, lay crumpled at the bottom of the trash bin, stained with coffee grounds. When I confronted my mother, she waved a hand. "Emily, swimming is good for your health, but it is not a future. Your brother's football can get him a scholarship. That is different. Different." That single word felt like a verdict. Do you know what it feels like to have your proudest moment tossed out like trash? Maybe you have. Maybe you have seen someone you love dismiss the best of you with a shrug. If you have, let me know in the comments. I promise you are not alone. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan, its blades cutting through the humid air. I thought of all the hours I had woken before dawn to train, all the mornings my muscles ached, all the times I pushed my body until my lungs burned. And none of it mattered, not to them. The next year, Daniel graduated high school. My father threw a party that filled the house with neighbors and relatives. Balloons bobbed in the corners, trays of food covered the kitchen counters, laughter spilled out onto the lawn. In the center of it all was Daniel, his football trophies gleaming on display. I stayed in my room, watching from the window as people congratulated my parents on raising such a fine young man. No one knocked on my door. No one asked where I was. I had become the ghost in my own house, present but unseen. When Daniel left for college, the silence in the house grew heavier. You might think his absence would give me more space, but it only left me as the sole target of my father's frustration. He drank more then, coming home with the smell of beer clinging to his clothes, his voice louder, his temper shorter. My mother shrank further into herself, her eyes downcast, her hands always busy with something, as if movement could make her invisible. One evening, I came home from my summer job at the diner and found the shoe box missing from the top shelf of my closet. It was where I had hidden every medal, every ribbon, every proof of my effort. I ran through the house, panic twisting in my gut, until I found my father in the garage. He did not even flinch when I asked. "Sold them," he said, wiping oil from his hands. "Needed the money for a frame for your brother's diploma. It is an investment in his future. Your stuff was just collecting dust." I remember the metallic taste in my mouth, the way my knees almost buckled. All those mornings in the pool, all those hours of sweat and discipline, gone in a single transaction. He looked at me then, his eyes hard. "You have to learn to sacrifice for others. That is what family does. Family." The word twisted like a blade. What he meant was that my dreams were fuel for my brother's future. My worth was measured only in what I could give up. I stood there frozen, 1,000 words clawing at my throat, but none of them escaped. Because deep down, I knew nothing I said would matter. Have you ever kept silent, not because you agreed, but because you knew your voice would never be heard? If you have, I hope you hear me now, because I carried that silence for years and it nearly broke me. That night I climbed into bed and stared at the ceiling again, but this time I did not imagine escape routes. I imagined walls. Thick, high walls around my heart, walls my father's words could no longer breach. And yet, no matter how strong the walls, the longing remained. I still wanted what every child wants, to be seen, to be loved. To hear the words, "I am proud of you." It took me years to understand that waiting for those words was like waiting for rain in the desert. You can pray for it, you can hope, but eventually you learn to find your own water. The final straw came on my 17th birthday. There was no cake, no candles. My mother handed me an envelope with a $20 bill inside and said, "Buy yourself something nice." My father did not even mention the day. Daniel called briefly, his voice full of excitement about a new internship. I sat on the porch steps that evening, the Indiana sunset bleeding orange across the sky. I felt hollow, but inside that hollow space something new was forming. A determination sharper than grief. I told myself quietly, one day I will leave this place. One day I will build a life so strong that no one can sell it, no one can throw it away, no one can ever call it worthless again. That vow carried me through the rest of high school. I studied late at night. I worked double shifts at the diner. I saved every dollar I could. While my father praised Daniel's every achievement, I built my escape in secret. I would not stay in Indiana. I would not become the forgotten daughter waiting for scraps of approval. I would carve out a new identity, one that no one could erase. At the time, I did not know what shape that identity would take. I only knew I had to leave. And this is where my story begins to shift, because sometimes the things we run from become the very fire that forges us. The rejection that once crushed me became the reason I could endure boot camp. The silence at home prepared me for nights in desert outposts where the only company was the sound of my own heartbeat. The hunger for recognition taught me how to stand tall in rooms where no one wanted me to succeed. Looking back, I see now that those years in Indiana were not wasted. They were training, not the kind the Army put me through later, but training all the same. Training in resilience, training in silence, training in how to fight without fists or weapons, how to endure the kind of loneliness that can hollow you out. And maybe you know what that feels like. Maybe you are carrying the weight of rejection right now in your own way. If that is you, hear this. You are not defined by the voices that call you worthless. You are not the sum of their dismissals. You are stronger than you know. Before we move on, let me ask, do you believe that pain can become purpose? Do you believe that rejection can plant the seeds of resilience? If you do, hit the like button. Share your story in the comments, because your voice matters, and it might just be the spark someone else needs tonight. The girl who was invisible in her own house would one day stand in uniform before the Pentagon. But before that day came, she had to walk into a recruiter's office, sign her name, and step into a world that would test her in ways she could never have imagined. That step, that leap into the unknown, is where the next chapter of my story begins. When I walked into the recruiter's office, the world was still reeling from the smoke and ashes of September. The year was 2001. The news replayed the collapse of the towers on a loop, and even in our quiet Indiana town, grief hung in the air like heavy fog. My father had called me useless more times than I could count, but that morning, as I stared at the flag outside the post office whipping in the autumn wind, I thought to myself, useless or not, I can serve. The office smelled of coffee and dust. Posters of soldiers in pressed uniforms lined the walls, their eyes fierce, their bodies in perfect formation. The recruiter looked up, surprise flickering across his face. Maybe he expected someone taller, louder, stronger. I was none of those things, but I was determined. Signing those papers felt like carving a line between two lives. The girl who taped her name to the refrigerator door and found it in the trash was gone. The soldier was about to be born. The bus to Fort Jackson was crowded with kids my age, some even younger, clutching duffel bags and nerves. They laughed too loud, bragged too much, trying to hide the same fear I felt. I kept quiet, staring out the window as the scenery blurred past. Every mile was a step away from Indiana. Boot camp was a storm that swallowed us whole. The first morning, the drill sergeant's voices thundered before the sun had even climbed the horizon. Their words were gravel and fire. Move faster, stand straighter, run harder. For a moment, I wondered if I had made the worst mistake of my life, but then something shifted. Every insult, every command, every impossible demand reminded me of home. I had been dismissed and belittled for years. I knew how to swallow pain. I knew how to endure silence. So instead of breaking me, their shouting became fuel. Every mile I ran, every push-up I forced through trembling arms, I thought of my father's voice telling me I was nothing. And I answered him with every drop of sweat that hit the dirt. Have you ever turned someone's doubt into your own engine? If you have, you know exactly what I mean. Tell me in the comments if you've ever been pushed forward by someone who tried to hold you back. The first weeks were brutal. My boots rubbed blisters raw, my muscles screamed in rebellion, my lungs burned in the humid southern air. There were nights I lay on the hard cot staring at the springs above me, my body begging me to quit, but each dawn I rose with a steady rhythm pounding inside me. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Most of the men in my platoon towered over me. Some smirked, muttering princess under their breath when I walked by. One corporal once tipped a can of oil over my freshly cleaned uniform, grinning as his buddies laughed. I clenched my jaw and said nothing, the old familiar silence rising to protect me. But then something happened that I had never experienced before. Someone stood up for me. It was Sergeant Harris, a Texan with a weathered face and eyes that saw more than he ever said. His boots carried authority before his voice did, but when he spoke, the motor pool fell silent. "Clean it up," Harris told the corporal, his voice low and steady. "Right now." His eyes never wavered from the man who had mocked me. And then he added, "She is your sister in arms, not your punchline." The words struck me like lightning. Sister in arms. I had never been called anyone's sister before, not like that, not with respect. That night I lay in my bunk replaying the moment. For the first time in my life, someone had stood beside me, not because they had to, but because they chose to. That feeling lit something deep inside me. It was the beginning of belonging. The days blurred into weeks. We ran until our legs felt like steel rods. We drilled until our voices cracked. We polished boots until they gleamed like mirrors. Slowly, we stopped being strangers. Sweat and hardship bound us together in ways words never could. On Thanksgiving, when the mess halls served lukewarm turkey and instant potatoes, I thought I would eat alone. But Harris and his wife Sarah found me sitting in the corner. They would not allow it. They swept me away to their small off-base house where the smell of roast turkey filled the air. Their children laughed as they played at our feet, and Sarah handed me a plate as if I belonged there. Do you know what it feels like to be welcomed when you least expect it? To walk into a room and realize you are no longer invisible. That night I felt something I had been craving my whole life. I felt like family. I helped Sarah clear the dishes, played board games with the kids, and when I left, my heart carried a warmth stronger than any meal. In the car, Harris said quietly, "Out here we look out for our own." Remember that? I did remember. I carried those words like armor. A few months later, it was my 21st birthday. I had not expected anything. My family in Indiana did not call. No card, no note, no mention. But when I returned to the barracks after a long day of drills, the entire platoon was waiting. Someone had painted a crooked banner with "Happy Birthday Carter." A lopsided cake from the PX sat glowing with candles, and 30 gruff voices broke into the worst rendition of Happy Birthday I had ever heard. I cried then, but not from sadness. I cried because these people, who owed me nothing, remembered me, while the people who owed me everything had forgotten. Family is not always written in blood. Sometimes it is forged in sweat, in dirt, in the sound of voices singing off-key because they care enough to try. That night I realized I was no longer the forgotten daughter. I was a soldier, and I was a sister. Before we move on, let me ask you, who in your life has shown up for you when you least expected it? Who has reminded you that you matter? Write their names in the comments. Honor them here. They deserve to be remembered. The Army stripped us down to nothing and rebuilt us brick by brick. In those months of training, I learned more about myself than in all the years before. Pain was constant, but so was progress. Every blister hardened into callus, every shaky push-up turned into strength. I had walked into Fort Jackson as a discarded daughter. I was becoming something new, someone solid. Yet it was not the physical grind that tested me the most. It was the silence that followed mail call. Every evening the drill sergeant would toss envelopes into eager hands. Soldiers ripped them open, grinning at handwriting from home, pictures of girlfriends, notes from proud parents. My name was rarely called. And when it was, the envelope was thin, the words inside even thinner. I still remember one letter from my mother. The paper was flimsy, the ink fading. She wrote 3 lines. Everything is fine here. Your father is the same. Remember to stay warm. That was it. No, I am proud of you. No, I miss you. Just a reminder to stay warm, as if I were a child who could not be trusted to dress herself. Have you ever longed for a sentence, just one, that would prove you mattered? Tell me in the comments if you have ever searched for approval that never came. You are not alone. It hurt. Of course it did. But the Army was teaching me a truth I had needed all along. Family was not about bloodlines. It was about loyalty. It was about who stood next to you in the mud, who picked you up when you fell, who shared their last sip of water when your throat burned dry. I found strength in the smallest rituals. The shine of boots polished until they caught the light. The rhythm of our chants on long runs. The sound of 30 voices shouting one cadence in perfect time. That unity, that shared purpose, filled the emptiness my family had carved inside me. The library on base became my refuge. One rainy afternoon, I stumbled across a battered copy of To Hell and Back, the autobiography of Audie Murphy. He had been a boy too small, too thin, turned away by recruiters. Yet he became the most decorated soldier of World War II. He did not fight for applause. He fought for his brothers in arms. He fought because he had a code no one could take from him. That story lit a fire inside me. I finally understood. Honor is not handed to you by your family. It is not given in their words, or withheld in their silence. Honor is something you forge for yourself, day by day, in sweat and grit and refusal to quit. From then on, I stopped searching the stands for faces that would never appear. I looked instead at the soldiers beside me. I poured my energy into becoming someone they could rely on. Graduation day arrived bright and clear. Families filled the bleachers, waving flags, snapping pictures. My side of the stands was empty. I stood alone in formation, my uniform pressed, my posture perfect. And yet for the first time, I did not feel the ache of being unwanted. I felt powerful. When the commander called my name for Distinguished Honor Graduate, my chest rose with steady pride. I walked to the podium, not for my parents, not for Indiana, but for myself and for the soldiers who had become my brothers and sisters. Do you know the moment when you stop begging for someone else's love and start standing in your own worth? It is freedom. It is fire. The ceremony ended. Some recruits rushed into their families' arms. I walked off the field into the open sky. The emptiness was no longer a void. It was space. Space I could fill with a new life, a new family, a new purpose. Fort Carson in Colorado became my first assignment. The Rockies loomed like guardians, their snow-tipped peaks slicing the horizon. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also lonely. I was the only woman in my platoon. The whispers returned. Princess, doll, too small, too soft. But by then I knew better. Every snicker reminded me of where I had come from. Every dismissive glance fueled me. I carried myself with quiet determination. I worked harder, ran faster, studied longer. Slowly, respect replaced mockery. The real turning point came on a sweltering afternoon in the motor pool. Grease stained our hands, sweat streaked our faces. A corporal, the same one who had dumped oil on me in training, muttered another joke at my expense. Before I could react, Harris appeared. His presence was calm but commanding. He told the corporal to stop. His voice was low, steady, undeniable. Then he looked at me, not with pity, not with indulgence, but with respect. That moment crystallized something I had been feeling for months. I was no longer the forgotten child. I was a soldier, and someone worth defending. That night, as I scrubbed the grease from my hands, I thought of my father. He had never defended me, never stood between me and the world's cruelty. Yet here in the army, men who had no blood ties to me had done what he never could. They had chosen to protect me. Maybe you know what that feels like. Maybe you too have found family in unexpected places. If so, I want you to share it here. Someone reading these comments might need to see your story to believe their own. The holidays were the hardest. Christmas came with no call, no letter. I sat in the barracks staring at the string of cheap lights someone had tacked to the wall. But then one of the sergeants invited me to dinner with his family. The table was crowded, laughter spilling into every corner. For a night, I was not a soldier, not an outsider. I was simply Emily, welcome and whole. Each of those moments built me brick by brick. A crooked banner on my birthday. A chair pulled out for me at Thanksgiving. A voice speaking up when mine faltered. These were the things that saved me. By the end of that first year, I realized something extraordinary. I had gone searching for a uniform, for structure, for a chance to prove myself. What I found was a family, not perfect but real, made of loyalty and grit. And the girl who had once been invisible was now standing strong in the open, ready for whatever came next. Before we move forward, I want to pause and ask you, have you ever looked back and realized that the darkest seasons of your life were preparing you for the brightest? If this story has stirred something in you, make sure you subscribe. These stories are not just mine. They are ours. Together we carry them forward. By spring, the harsh edges of military life had started to feel like home. The barracks were noisy, the hours merciless, but inside those walls I was no longer the girl my parents had overlooked. I was Private Carter, someone my platoon could depend on. That small shift mattered more than any ribbon or medal ever could. Still, loneliness trailed me like a shadow. Some nights it curled at the foot of my bunk, whispering doubts when the lights went out. Was I only fooling myself? Was I still that invisible daughter, only dressed now in camouflage instead of faded hand-me-downs? One night, close to Easter, the platoon gathered in the common area after chow. Someone had found a battered guitar, and another soldier tapped rhythm on the table. The voices were off-key, the words stumbled, but laughter filled the cracks. I sat in the corner, content to watch, until Harris waved me over. His smile was small but insistent. "Sit down, Carter," he said. "This is your family, too." The words nearly undid me. Family. He had said it so easily, as if it were fact, and maybe it was. Have you ever had someone call you family when you least expected it? Sometimes that one word is enough to stitch closed years of old wounds. If you have felt that, drop a note below. Someone needs to see that they are not alone. From then on, I began to let myself belong. I shared stories from Indiana, not the ones about my father's anger or my brother's trophies, but the quieter ones. How the summer air smelled of cut hay. How the high school pool was always freezing on November mornings. My platoon laughed at my dry jokes, teased me when my Midwest accent slipped out. It was simple, ordinary, and it healed me more than I realized at the time. That first summer, I turned 21. Birthdays had always been quiet, overlooked affairs in my childhood. Sometimes my mother forgot until the next day. Sometimes my father would mutter a distracted, happy birthday while heading out the door. But that year, I returned from a long day in the field to find the common room strung with clumsy decorations. A crooked banner hung on the wall, letters painted in uneven strokes. Happy birthday, Carter. A lopsided cake from the PX sat on the table, glowing with crooked candles. 30 voices broke into the worst rendition of Happy Birthday I had ever heard, gruff and tone-deaf, but so fiercely joyful that I could not hold back my tears. That was the moment I knew. These soldiers were not just comrades, they were my brothers. They had given me something my own family never had, the gift of being seen. Do you remember the first time someone celebrated you without hesitation? That memory becomes a lighthouse. Hold on to it. It will guide you through darker seas. Harris became more than a mentor. He was a compass. He noticed details no one else did. If I skipped a meal, he asked why. If I pushed myself too hard, he told me to slow down. Not because he doubted me, but because he wanted me to last. His care was quiet, steady, the kind that asked for nothing in return. On Thanksgiving, he and his wife, Sarah, insisted I join them off base. Their little house smelled of roasted turkey and cinnamon pie. Their children climbed onto my lap, sticky with frosting and giggles. When Sarah passed me the mashed potatoes, I felt a lump rise in my throat. I had never been treated as someone's own at a holiday table before. That night, driving back to the barracks, Harris said only one thing. In this life, Carter, we look out for our own. That is what family means. It was the simplest lesson and the truest one. Through drills and night watches, through desert training and long marches, that bond deepened. We were not perfect. We bickered, we cursed, we sometimes pushed each other to the edge of exhaustion. But beneath it all was an unspoken oath. You do not let your brother or sister fall behind. You do not let them fight alone. Looking back now, I realize those years saved me. The Army did not erase the scars of my childhood, but it gave me new ones, earned in sweat and resilience, scars I could carry with pride. And maybe that is why I held on so fiercely. Because for the first time in my life, I was not disposable. I was essential. If you are listening to this, and you have ever felt like the outsider, like the forgotten child or the unseen friend, know this. You are not defined by who turned away. You are defined by who walks beside you now. Hold on to those who show up when it matters. That is your family. As the months turned into years, I rose through the ranks, but I never forgot that crooked banner or the voices singing off-key. They were proof that love does not always come from the place you expect. Sometimes it comes from strangers who fight in the mud beside you, until they are no longer strangers at all. The girl from Indiana, the one whose father once sold her swimming medal, had finally found a place where nothing she earned could be taken from her. That truth, that bond, became the foundation for everything that would come next. And though I did not know it then, that foundation would be tested in ways more brutal than I could imagine. Are you ready to follow me into that storm? Because what happened next would change everything. The Army taught me how to stand tall, how to give orders, and how to carry the weight of lives that depended on my decisions. By the time I pinned on my officer's bars, I had learned to hold my voice steady in the face of chaos. But nothing in my training had prepared me for the voice that came crackling through the phone one humid evening in Colorado Springs. It was Alex, my brother, the golden boy of our family. His tone was warm, almost too warm, like honey covering something sour. Emily, it's been too long. I'm proud of you, sis. Heard you got promoted. That's amazing. The words should have meant something. Instead, they felt rehearsed, as if he were reading lines from a script. I waited because I knew what came next. And sure enough, there it was. I've got this incredible opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime investment. All I need is a co-signer, and the bank will greenlight it. With your record, with your steady paycheck, it'll be easy. You'd be helping the family. You'd be helping me. Helping. The word lodged in my chest like a splinter. All those years of sacrifice, all those medals earned in sand and blood, and now my worth had been reduced again to what I could give away. I stayed silent long enough that he started filling the air with nervous chatter. Promises of returns, guarantees that it was safe, assurances that it was only paperwork. Have you ever listened to someone and known every word was a carefully built trap? If you have, you know the ache in your gut when you realize they do not see you as a person, only as a resource. I asked the only question that mattered. What happens if it fails? His voice faltered, just for a second, and in that pause I heard the truth. When I refused, when I said no with the steady calm I had learned under fire, the mask slipped. His voice grew sharp. So after everything, after all Dad and Mom did for you, you're just going to turn your back on us. The words stung, even though they were lies. What had they done for me except teach me that love was conditional and easily withdrawn? That night I walked outside the barracks. The Colorado sky stretched wide, filled with sharp stars. I breathed the thin mountain air and let the silence settle inside me. For the first time, I felt the old cords of guilt begin to loosen. Family had always been the word they used to bind me. But what is family if it only takes and never gives? What is family if it cannot recognize your worth? I ask you, listening now, have you ever had to say no to someone you loved because saying yes would destroy you? That moment is both terrifying and liberating. Days later, the phone rang again. This time it was my father. His voice, once the booming authority of my childhood, was ragged with age but no less sharp. You are going to sign those papers for your brother. That's not a request. That's your duty. I stood in my small officer's quarters, the phone pressed tight to my ear, and I felt my hands trembling. Not from fear this time, but from rage. Years of swallowed silence rose up inside me. No, I said, just that one word, solid, immovable. The silence that followed was brief but heavy, then his roar shattered it. You are no daughter of mine, do you hear me? You are nothing. The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand. For most of my life, those words would have gutted me, but not now, not anymore. For the first time, I placed the phone down without tears streaking my face. I felt something break, yes, but it was not my spirit. It was the chain that had kept me tethered to their approval. And in that breaking, I felt free. Mini hook here. Do you believe sometimes the harshest rejection can become the doorway to freedom? I did not know it yet, but that night marked the first true step into my own life. I closed the curtains, turned off the light, and sat on the edge of my bed. Outside, soldiers laughed on the barracks lawn, their voices rising into the night air. Those voices were my reminder. I was not alone. I had a family. It just did not share my last name. That realization was a quiet revolution, and it prepared me for the storm that was still coming. The first call ended in silence, but silence never lasts long in families like mine. When people are used to controlling you, they do not simply walk away. They regroup, they come back sharper, more desperate, cloaked in guilt and obligation. It was a Saturday evening when the phone rang again. I had just returned from the field, my boots still dusted with the dry grit of training. The barracks smelled of sweat and gun oil. I was exhausted, but I answered anyway. This time it was my mother. Her voice was soft, trembling in that way she had perfected over decades, a trembling that begged for rescue. Emily, honey, you know your father. He doesn't mean half the things he says. He's just worried. His heart isn't strong. The doctor warned us about stress. And Alex, he is drowning, sweetheart. He needs this break. If you would just help, it would mean the world to your father, to me. I leaned against the metal frame of my bunk, staring at the floor tiles, each word pressing against old wounds. She had never defended me. She had never once stepped in when I was being cut down. But now, suddenly, she was pleading. For him, always for him. There was a pause, and then the blow landed. After everything we've done for you, don't you think you owe this family that much? Oh, the word echoed in my chest, a hollow drumbeat. I thought of the medals my father had sold to frame Alex's diploma. I thought of the newspaper clipping of my swimming victory crumpled in the trash. I thought of birthdays forgotten, calls unanswered, letters unopened. What exactly did I owe them? I wanted to shout it. I wanted to rip the phone from my ear and scream all the truths I had swallowed. Instead, I closed my eyes and forced my voice steady. No, Mom, I don't owe you this. I don't owe you anything. Her sobs filled the line, dramatic, practiced. Emily, please. If you don't do it, might kill your father. Is that what you want? To bury him with this shame on his chest? That was the weapon she chose. Guilt sharpened into a blade and pressed against my ribs. Tell me, have you ever felt someone press your love into a weapon and turn it back on you? It cuts deeper than steel. I sat there, trembling, the phone hot in my hand. But beneath the trembling was a fire. Years of silence had taught me endurance, and the army had taught me resolve. No, I said again, louder this time, clearer. If Dad's health depends on me destroying my own life, then maybe the problem is not mine to solve. The silence that followed was not shocked. It was angry, furious. A silence that throbbed with resentment. Then, in a quiet hiss, she whispered, "Your father was right. You have no heart." And she hung up. I set the phone down carefully as if it were a live grenade. My hands were shaking, but not from weakness, from release. Every word they threw at me only made the truth clearer. I had spent too many years mistaking fear for loyalty, mistaking silence for love. Later that night, the phone rang once more. This time it was Alex again, but his charm had vanished. His words were sharp, frantic, ugly. "You selfish brat. Do you know how much you're ruining for us, for me? After all the money we put into you, after the years of sacrifice." I cut him off. My voice was like steel. "You never sacrificed for me. You took from me. You always took." He sputtered, angry, but I did not stay to listen. I ended the call, slid the phone across the desk, and sat back in my chair. For the first time in my life, I felt the weight of their demands lift off me. It struck me then, with the clarity of a soldier seeing the battlefield from above. They did not want me. They wanted what I could give. And when I stopped giving, they would discard me again. So why was I still bleeding for their approval? Here's a question for you listening now. How many of us keep chasing love from people who have shown us again and again they cannot give it? And why do we believe their opinion defines our worth? The following week, I poured myself into my unit. We trained in the rain. We ran until our lungs burned. We scrubbed mud from our rifles until the steel shone. Every hour spent with them was a reminder of where my true loyalty belonged. But the storm had not passed. A letter arrived 2 weeks later, tucked under my door. My father's handwriting scrawled across the envelope. I opened it, my hands steady. The words were exactly what I expected. Condemnation, fury, commands written as if I were still 10 years old. "You will sign for your brother. You will not disgrace this family. You will obey." Obey. That was the final straw. I folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and locked it in my footlocker. Not because it hurt, but because it no longer did. It was proof. Evidence of the chains I was finally breaking. That night, under the thin light of the barracks lamp, I made a vow. I would not bend. Not this time. Not ever again. I ask you to consider this. What would your life look like if you stopped bending to those who never cared if you broke? That vow became my turning point. It was not easy. Every instinct in me still longed for their approval, still flinched at the sound of my father's voice. But I held the line. I had faced enemy fire. I had walked through ambushes and mortars. Surely I could withstand the ghosts of my own family. In truth, it was harder. But it was also the beginning of my freedom. The days after my father's letter felt strangely quiet, as if the air itself had shifted. I had expected to feel hollow, undone by his words. Instead, I felt lighter, like a weight I had carried since childhood had finally slipped from my shoulders. For years, I had begged at the door of their love, knocking until my hands bled. Now, at last, I realized that door had never been mine to open. It was early morning when the final test came. I was in my quarters, pulling on my boots before a long march when the phone buzzed again. My father's number glared across the screen. For a moment, habit tugged at me. The old reflex whispered, answer, explain, justify, but I had no explanations left to give. I let it ring. The sound filled the room, sharp, insistent, demanding. Then it fell silent. A voicemail notification blinked. I did not listen. Not then, not ever. That choice was my liberation. Have you ever felt the power of not answering? The power of saying nothing when silence is the only answer that matters. If you have, you know the deep breath that follows, the space it creates in your chest. That night, I burned the letter. I stepped outside into the cool Colorado air, the mountains black silhouettes against a star-washed sky. I lit a match, touched it to the paper, and watched the flames curl around each word. The ink shriveled, the page blackened, and the smoke carried away decades of demands, insults, and commands. The ash fluttered into the wind, tiny fragments dissolving into the dark. My eyes stayed dry. My heart stayed steady. That fire was not destruction, it was cleansing. I whispered into the night, not for them, but for me. I am no longer yours to define. In that moment, I felt something shift in the marrow of my bones. I was no longer the daughter trying to earn love. I was Captain Emily Carter, soldier, leader, survivor. Do you believe that letting go is an act of courage? Too often we think strength means holding on. But sometimes the bravest thing you can do is release what has already been lost. From then on, I poured my entire self into my unit. They became my compass, my anchor. When I stood in front of them, giving orders before a field exercise, I knew my voice carried more than commands. It carried the weight of every battle I had fought to claim my own worth. And they listened. They trusted me. Trust. That was something my family had never given me. And yet here, among soldiers who owed me nothing, it bloomed. That trust was proof that I had built something real. One evening, Harris found me sitting outside the motor pool, the sky streaked with pink and gold. He studied me for a long moment, then said quietly, "You've changed." I nodded. I stopped waiting. He tilted his head. For what? For people who were never coming. His gaze softened. That's when you start to live, Carter. That's when you stop surviving and start living. His words stayed with me. They became a kind of mantra in the months ahead. Every time doubt crept in, every time the old guilt tried to dig its claws into me, I repeated them. Stop waiting. Start living. To this day, I ask myself, and I ask you listening now, who are you still waiting for? Whose approval holds your life hostage? And what would happen if you finally stopped waiting? That winter, my mother wrote once more. A short note, folded into an envelope, the handwriting shaky. No apology. No acknowledgement of her part in the manipulation. Just one line. Your father says you are no longer welcome here. I read it once. I folded it, and I placed it in the trash. The sound of it falling into the bin was not bitter. It was final. The girl from Indiana would once have crumpled under that sentence. But the woman in uniform, with scars on her hands and strength in her spine, understood the truth. I had never been welcome there. Not really. And that was no longer my tragedy. It was their loss. When I walked into formation the next morning, I carried myself differently. My posture was straighter, my step more sure. The men and women beside me did not know the details, but they sensed it. The air around me had shifted. That was the first day I truly felt free. And here is the truth I want to leave with you at the end of this chapter. Family is not defined by blood. It is defined by loyalty, by love that shows up, not just when it is convenient, but when it costs something. I had lost one family, but I had gained another. And that choice, to stand with those who stood with me, would carry me through the battles yet to come. So let me ask you, what chains are you still carrying that were never yours to hold? And what would it take to set them down, to burn them into ash, and to walk forward lighter? That night in Colorado, as the ashes of my father's letter scattered into the wind, I knew my answer. I was no longer their shadow. I was no longer their disappointment. I was Emily Carter, and I was finally free. Afghanistan was a land of dust and mountains, a place where every shadow seemed to hold both beauty and danger. The air was dry, the horizon endless, and every day carried the hum of risk. By the time I deployed, I had worn the uniform long enough to know that war was not like the movies. It was quieter, more mundane in its waiting. Hours of boredom, minutes of terror. We were stationed in a valley near Kunar province, where jagged peaks cut the sky like broken glass. Our mission was routine on paper, a reconnaissance patrol to check supply routes that had been targeted before. But in war, routine is a fragile illusion. That morning I checked my gear with steady hands. The weight of my rifle was familiar, the body armor heavy but grounding. I looked into the faces of the soldiers under my command. They were young, some barely out of high school, their eyes sharp but edged with nerves. It was my responsibility to bring them home. That responsibility pressed on me harder than the Kevlar against my chest. We moved out at dawn, boots crunching against the gravel, the silence of the valley broken only by the distant cry of goats. I had learned long ago to listen not just with my ears, but with my bones. Something in the air was off that day. The silence was too heavy, the birds too still. And then it came. The crack of gunfire ripped through the calm, sharp and merciless. Bullets hissed past like angry bees, ricocheting against rocks. My soldiers dove for cover, the valley erupting into chaos. Dust filled the air, stinging my throat, my eyes. Ambush, time slowed. Training took over. I shouted orders, my voice cutting through the noise. Cover left flank, push forward to the ridge, move, move. Fear clawed at my gut, but I forced it down. My soldiers were looking at me, waiting for direction. Their lives hung in the balance of my decisions. I crawled to higher ground, bullets snapping inches from my helmet. The enemy was dug into the ridge, firing down in a rain of fire. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped. The easy choice would have been to freeze, to wait for backup. But waiting meant death. I made the call. Smoke out, fall back in staggered teams, cover each other. No one gets left behind. They followed without hesitation because trust runs deeper than fear. One by one, they pulled back, moving low, covering each other with bursts of fire. I was the last to move, always the last. That is the rule of command. As I sprinted to the final cover point, an explosion ripped through the dirt behind me, the force lifting me off my feet. My ears rang, the world spinning. For a moment, all I heard was the rush of my own heartbeat. But then I saw them. My soldiers, alive, running, covering each other, because I had told them to. That sight pulled me to my feet. Pain shot through my side, but I pushed forward, firing back at the ridge as I stumbled toward safety. The smoke clouded the air, giving us cover. Step by step, yard by yard, we pulled free of the kill zone. When we finally regrouped at the extraction point, every face was there. Dirty, bloodied, shaking, but alive. Relief surged through me so strong it felt like breaking open. Later, as we waited for the Black Hawks, one of my youngest soldiers, barely 19, looked at me with wide eyes. His voice cracked. "Ma'am, you saved us." I shook my head, throat tight. No, we saved each other. That night, under the foreign stars, I lay on my cot, unable to sleep. My body ached, my ears still hummed with the echo of gunfire, but my mind replayed every choice I had made. The truth settled deep inside me. I had not just survived, I had led. And that was the moment that marked me. Not the ambush itself, but the choice to stand steady in its chaos. Minnie Hook, do you believe courage is the absence of fear, or is it standing tall despite it? I had never felt more afraid, but I had never felt more certain either. Weeks later, the reports were written, the details analyzed, and the story traveled higher up the chain of command. One day, Harris walked into my tent with a rare smile tugging at his mouth. "They're putting your name up for something big, Carter," he said. You kept your people alive against impossible odds. That's not nothing." I swallowed hard, not knowing what to say. Medals had been objects my father stole, symbols of pride denied to me. Now here I was, being told I might receive one of the highest honors the army could give. But even as the news sank in, I thought only of the faces of my soldiers that day. Their lives were the real medal. Their survival was the only honor I needed. Still, history has a way of catching up to us, and soon I would find myself not in a dusty valley of Afghanistan, but under the bright lights of Washington, standing before cameras, my name read aloud for the nation. And on that day, far away, my family would be forced to watch. The morning after the ambush, the camp was quiet in a way I had never known before. No one laughed, no one joked. We went about our routines, but the air was heavy, each breath thick with memory. Dust still clung to our boots, and though we had walked away with our lives, the battle had left its fingerprints on all of us. I sat on the edge of my cot, lacing my boots with hands that would not stop trembling. My ribs ached from the blast. My hearing still pulsed with a faint ringing. But it was not the pain in my body that haunted me. It was the images replaying in my head, flashes of gunfire, the explosion of dirt, the look in my soldiers' eyes as they waited for me to decide their fate. I had brought them home, but the weight of almost losing them pressed against me like a stone. Later that day, I walked through the mess hall. Conversations hushed as I passed, eyes following me. At one table, a young private stood up abruptly, his tray clattering. He was one of the youngest, only months out of basic training, freckles still scattered across his cheeks. He snapped to attention, his voice unsteady but loud. "Ma'am, thank you for my life." The room fell silent. His words echoed off the walls, raw and simple. My throat closed. I wanted to tell him it was not me, that it was the team, the training, the sheer stubborn will to survive. But the words would not come. I managed only a nod, my chest burning with emotions I could not name. Do you know what it feels like when someone gives you credit for the breath in their lungs? It is both humbling and crushing. That night, Harris found me sitting outside the command tent. The stars stretched over us, cold and endless. He lowered himself onto the crate beside me, his boots crunching in the dirt. "You did good, Carter," he said. His voice was steady, but his eyes searched mine. "I almost lost them," I whispered. "If I had made one wrong call..." He cut me off with a shake of his head. "But you didn't, that's the difference. You stood in the fire and you didn't flinch. That's leadership, that's why they trust you." I looked at him, the words sinking in. Trust. That word carried more weight than any medal, because for me, trust had always been the rarest gift. 2 weeks later, the news came down. I was summoned to the commanding officer's tent, my palms sweating despite the cool morning air. The colonel looked at me with a gravity I had only seen a few times in my career. "Captain Carter," he said, "your actions during the Kunar Valley ambush saved every soldier under your command. You're being nominated for the Silver Star." For a moment, the words didn't make sense. The Silver Star was one of the highest honors a soldier could receive. My mind flashed back to the girl in Indiana whose medals had been sold for spare cash, whose victories had been tossed in the trash. Now here I was, being told the United States Army itself had seen me. I stood rigid, saluted, and said the only words I could manage. "Yes, sir." Inside, though, I was reeling. That night, I walked to the edge of camp where the valley stretched wide beneath the moonlight. I thought of my father's voice telling me I was nothing. I thought of my brother's demands, my mother's guilt. I thought of the phone calls that had once shattered me. And I thought of the private who had stood in the mess hall, thanking me for his life. For the first time in my life, I realized I did not need their approval. I had earned something greater. Respect. Trust. Honor forged in fire. Hook here. Have you ever reached a point where the people who once defined you no longer hold power over you? That night, I knew I had crossed that line. The days that followed blurred together. Paperwork, reports, more patrols. but beneath it all was a current of anticipation. The nomination meant I would eventually be called back stateside for a ceremony. The thought filled me with both dread and defiance. I knew my parents would see it. I knew the cameras would carry my name into their living room whether they wanted it or not. And for once, I did not care. Their silence, their rejection, their cruelty, none of it mattered anymore. Because when my name was read, when the medal was pinned to my chest, it would not be for them. It would be for the soldiers whose faces I still saw in my dreams. It would be for the 19-year-old with freckles. It would be for Harris, who had stood by me when no one else would. And maybe, in some small corner of my heart, it would be for the girl I had once been. The girl who swam her way to victory only to see her medal sold. The girl who sat invisible in her own home. She deserved to be honored too. The news spread quickly through the unit. Soldiers clapped me on the shoulder, some with wide grins, others with quiet nods of respect. The pride in their eyes meant more than the medal itself ever could. But with the pride came an unexpected burden. Survivors' guilt gnawed at me in the quiet hours. Yes, we had all lived that day, but I had seen what could have been. I had seen the bullet that could have struck true, the blast that could have killed us all. Some nights I lay awake, hearing the phantom echoes of that ambush. The silver star might honor courage, but it could never silence the ghosts. Still, I knew this much. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward with the fear pressed into your chest, refusing to let it own you. That truth carried me through the nights until the orders finally came. I was going home, to Washington, to the Pentagon, to stand under lights in front of cameras before generals and senators while a nation watched. And far away in a quiet Indiana living room, my family would have no choice but to watch too. The Pentagon gleamed in the autumn sunlight, its stone walls rising like a fortress of history. The city buzzed with the rhythm of government, but inside me there was only stillness. I had marched through deserts, slept in dirt, carried the lives of soldiers in my hands. Now I was walking into a hall lined with flags, dressed in my best uniform, and it felt heavier than any battlefield. The air smelled faintly of polish and flowers. Rows of seats stretched out in front of the stage, filled with dignitaries, generals, senators, soldiers in pressed uniforms. Cameras lined the back, their lenses like watchful eyes. Somewhere thousands of miles away, a television flickered in an Indiana living room. I knew my parents were watching. The thought used to terrify me. But as I walked to my seat, the ribbons on my chest catching the light, I realized I felt no fear. Not anymore. The ceremony began with speeches. Words about valor, sacrifice, courage. I listened, but my thoughts drifted to the faces of my soldiers, to the valley where the air had been thick with dust and gunfire. I thought of the 19-year-old with freckles, alive because of that day. That was what mattered. And then my name was called. Captain Emily Carter. I rose, my boots clicking against the floor, and walked to the podium. The applause swelled around me, but I heard none of it. All I heard was the echo of my father's voice from years ago. You are nothing. The words rose unbidden, but this time they carried no power. The general stood before me, his hands steady as he pinned the silver star to my uniform. The metal was cool against the fabric, but what I felt was warmth, the weight of every moment that had led me here. I turned to face the audience. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled. Applause continued. I did not search the crowd for familiar faces. I did not look for my parents in the shadows of memory. Instead, I lifted my chin and looked toward the flag above the stage, its stars and stripes unfurling in quiet dignity. Behind me, in the rows of seats, my soldiers sat together. Their uniforms were not as decorated, their names not called. But their eyes met mine, steady, proud, unshaken. They knew what we had survived together. They knew the truth of honor. That was all I needed. Do you know what it feels like to finally stop chasing the gaze that never sees you, and instead rest your eyes on those who truly do? That moment is freedom. That moment is power. As the ceremony drew to a close, the general spoke of courage under fire, of leadership that saved lives. His words painted me as a hero. I felt the heat of them, but inside I whispered the truth. I was not a hero. I was a soldier who refused to let her people die. I was a woman who refused to break. When the final salute was given, the audience rose to their feet. The ovation thundered through the hall. I stood still, my posture firm, my heart steady. Somewhere, on a flickering television screen in Indiana, my father and mother were forced to witness what they had once dismissed. They could not sell this medal. They could not throw it away. They could not erase it. But I did not stand there for them. I stood there for myself. That night, back in my hotel room, I sat alone for the first time since the ceremony. The medal lay on the table, gleaming in the lamplight. I picked it up, feeling its cool weight, and I thought of the swimming medal my father had sold. One was gone forever, but this one was mine. Not because the army had given it to me, but because I had earned it with every step, every choice, every refusal to quit. I pressed it to my chest and whispered, "I see you, Emily, I see you. Hook here. Have you ever realized the recognition you needed most was your own?" That night, I finally gave it to myself. The next morning, I received a message from Harris. He had watched the broadcast, his words simple. "Proud of you, Carter. You honored all of us out there." I smiled through tears. His pride mattered. My soldiers' pride mattered. My own pride mattered. That was enough. In Indiana, the phones were silent. No call from my father. No note from my mother. But for the first time, their silence did not wound me. It freed me. Because the truth was clear. I had never been their daughter in the way I had longed to be. But I was a daughter of something greater, of courage, of loyalty, of a family built in the mud and the fire of war. And in that hall, under the gaze of the flag and the eyes of my soldiers, I had claimed my place. Not as their child, not as their disappointment, but as myself. Captain Emily Carter. That name was enough. So let me leave you with this question. Whose voice are you still carrying that tells you you are nothing? And what would happen if you finally set it down and listened instead to the voices of those who see your worth? When you answer that, you may just find your own medal waiting, shining quietly, proof that you were always more than they believed. When I hung up my uniform for the last time, I did it with hands that no longer shook. I had given my years, my strength, and a part of my soul to the army, and it had given me something back that my childhood never could. A name I could stand behind. A family I could trust. A self I could finally believe in. I left the barracks behind and chose the quiet hills of Vermont, a place where the seasons paint the land with fire and snow. There, I bought a small farm with weathered barns and wide fields, the kind of land that carries silence like an old friend. I thought I was choosing solitude, but what I found instead was purpose. Because war leaves scars that do not fade when the guns fall silent. And I saw too many young women walking away from service with their heads bowed, carrying burdens they did not deserve. So I opened my doors, first to one, then to many. A program grew, not with polished brochures or shiny buildings, but with trust. Women came here to rest, to breathe, to find their footing again. One young private sat across from me one evening, her voice breaking as she confessed she no longer knew who she was without the uniform. I listened, because sometimes that is the greatest gift we can give. Then I told her what had taken me a lifetime to learn. That honor is not a medal. It is not the applause of strangers or the approval of family. It is knowing, deep in your marrow, that you are enough. She cried, then she smiled, and in that moment I saw her begin to believe it. And maybe that is why I keep going. Not for medals, not for ceremonies, but for the chance to remind another woman that she is not invisible, that her worth is not negotiable. The last piece of my past came in the form of an envelope I had carried for years. My father's handwriting scrawled across the front, unopened. One autumn night, beneath the maple trees that ringed my farmhouse, I struck a match and let the flame catch. The paper curled, blackened, and then turned to ash. The wind lifted it away into the dark. I stood there, the smell of smoke on the air, and I whispered the truth I had earned in fire and in silence. I am no longer the child overlooked. I am Emily Carter, soldier, survivor, guide. And my name, my life, my voice, they are enough. If this story has touched something in you, if you have ever carried scars of rejection or stood up under the weight of doubt, I want you to stay with us. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share it with someone who may need to hear these words. Each week we bring you stories of strength, resilience, and the quiet victories of those who have walked through fire and found their way forward. Because at the heart of it all, here is what I believe. Family is not always where you begin. Sometimes it is the one you build. Honor is not given, it is forged. And your worth, your true worth, lies not in the eyes of others, but in the belief you carry in yourself. And that, in the end, will always be enough.